The psychoactive drug we know as marijuana is currently undertaking a complete shift in how it's perceived in not only science, but popular culture as well. The psychoactive component of the plant is called THC, and it's fallen under scrutiny in recent times as there's people that consider it harmful and those that want to unlock the hidden health benefits that it has to offer. To understand how it affects us biologically, we first have to deconstruct the chemicals that are within marijuana. These are called cannabinoids. The system that these act upon is called the endocannabinoid system. And firstly, I'd like to clarify that this system doesn't exist for the sake of recreational marijuana use, but actually has functionality well before we come into contact with marijuana for the first time. In many parts of the body, there are systems at work that restore and maintain balance. We see this in other areas of the body, such as temperature regulation. So in response to being hot, thermoreceptors in your skin will send signals to your hypothalamus in your brain. The hypothalamus will then send signals to sweat glands and you will secrete sweat and the heat will be lost through evaporation. So what is the function of our endocannabinoid system? Well, it has a few, and just to name a couple, it's involved with stress, pain regulation, as well as appetite stimulation. So in response to a stimulus, whether that's the need to eat or stress, your endocannabinoid system will quickly get to work to restore balance. To understand how cannabinoids affect us, we first have to look at how messages are actually sent around our body. There's a lot going on here, but all we need to focus on firstly are the synaptic vesicles. These carry neurotransmitters. There are also calcium ion channels on the outside of the presynaptic part of the neuron, and once an electrical potential reaches that part of the cell, these channels will open and cause for calcium to flood through. On the outside of the synaptic vesicles, you can see yellow and purple proteins. These allow them to attach to the red docking proteins on the presynaptic membrane. But without calcium, they have a hard time binding. So let's see what happens when the action potential reaches that part of the neuron. The calcium ion channels open and calcium will flood into the cell and bind with the surface proteins on the synaptic vesicles, called synaptotagmin. Once bound, they can easily bind to the docking proteins and the neurotransmitters are then dumped into the synaptic cleft. Here they come into contact with neurotransmitter receptors, and depending on the neurotransmitter that is dumped, a different reaction can occur. An example of what could occur is when the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is dumped into the synaptic cleft. This will bind to the receptors and allow sodium that is floating in the cleft to flood into the postsynaptic neuron, which will then excite the neuron and continue the electrical chemical signal. These sorts of signals are going on throughout your entire body, and it's kind of like an electrical chemical baton toss where these signals are going from one to the other until they reach their destination. So what is the function of endocannabinoids and how do they relate to that signaling cascade? Well, once a signal reaches its destination, we don't need that continuous strong signal. So we need to restore things back to the way they were initially. And the way we achieve this is through endocannabinoids. Also on the neuron are two proteins called the CBD1 and CBD2 receptor, each one more abundant in different parts of the body. CBD1 receptors are found primarily in several parts of the brain, and CBD2 receptors are found primarily in immune cells. So depending on the location where the signal is being sent, the endocannabinoids will either bind to CBD1 or CBD2. So once the cannabinoid binds to the receptor, it will activate a G protein, which will then detach and attach itself to the open ion channel. And this will cause it to close and terminate the signal. As we discussed, THC is also a cannabinoid and it will act on the same mechanism that the homeostatic endocannabinoids act on within our body, as it will compete for the same binding site on the CBD1 and CBD2 receptors. This process is called competitive inhibition, and this won't allow the homeostatic endocannabinoids to bind to the same site, and instead of leading to termination of that potent strong signal, it'll end up increasing the signal. And here's the really weird part. Depending on the expression level or the amount of receptors that are there, it could block the signal, which is completely counterintuitive to what we knew before. The nature of THC now is very complex, as the expression level of these receptors is different in many parts of the body and brain. And the expression level of the receptors is also influenced by external factors. A lot of people have a different reaction to marijuana, and this causes me to think that the reaction you have is a mixed bag. It's different from person to person, and more importantly, the differing biological conditions that exist within all of us. And this makes a lot of sense because when people get high, they usually complain of being hungry, they're either anxious or have paranoia, or they're overcome with uncontrollable laughter. And that's because the signal in that region of the brain is increasingly active, and it's not acted upon by those endogenous endocannabinoids that maintain balance. And that's basically the impact that THC has on our bodies. But there are plenty of other cannabinoids that exist within marijuana, and one that's gaining a lot of attention in medical research recently is CBD. Plenty of research papers have actually been done that illustrate that CBD is the complete counter to THC in the fact that you will not experience getting high, but you'll still benefit from the positive health effects that the endocannabinoid system has to offer. I'll do a video in the future on CBD and its implication in modern medicine. But that'll be it for me today, so thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you'd like to see in the future, or something you'd like to add about endocannabinoids. And peace.